Just a little bit about the format. So we want to keep it pretty informal. So the format is going to be as follows. So the first about 5 or 10 minutes, I'm going to kick it off by asking Vinod a few questions. After that, we're going to throw it open to the audience, and we'll just go with the flow. One thing I do want to say is that so if you have Twitter and if you want to tweet questions, that might be an effective way of getting questions in. So just use hashtag NASCOMPC, and I'll keep refreshing my screen here, and I'll take your question and ask Vinod. So without further ado, Vinod, thank you very much. It's definitely an honor to have you come here. I'd like to start off with failure. So you mentioned this morning about how failure is sort of such an integral part of this, and you love going to this failure conference. So could you just tell us more about that?
Well, my basic view is, if you're going to do something new and different, you have to try something new and different first. You can't do something new without trying it. If you don't, and if you're going to try it, you have to be ready to fail, because you never know when you're trying something new that it'll work or not. So unless you're willing to take the risk of failure, you're not going to do anything new. And it's so obvious to me, it's hard to even talk about it. Too many people spend too much time worrying about what happens if it doesn't succeed. What happens to me if it doesn't succeed is I try something else new. Right? Long ago, I said, I'm not going to be embarrassed because I failed at something. In fact, I sort of like to say I probably failed more than most people have. Mostly because I've tried more things than most people have tried. And whenever I have an idea, I'm just willing to try it.
So, one of the questions that people ask is, as a VC, you have a portfolio approach, and sure, you might fail twice or 9 times out of 10, the one big hit, you're in. As entrepreneurs in the room,
And instead of getting a high salary, you had no salary. And I literally, the first 6 months, was worried about how to pay for my room, right? I couldn't pay rent. So it's much more attitude. You can always find an excuse why you can't take a risk. Generally, when you're younger, it's easier to take risks. When you have a wife and family, it's sort of harder. But I was lucky. My wife sort of didn't worry about not having a house to live in when we were starting. But it really is mostly about attitude. And it's about sort of saying, if one thing doesn't work, I'll try something new.
But what is that point, Vinod? I mean, there's also the perseverance and persistence, and you have these hurdles that are always coming on your way that you do need to jump over, and sometimes giving up early and trying something else is better. Have you seen like a pattern here as to?
So this is an important question. When do you decide you've tried something enough to give up on it? I find the people who are good at it understand why what they're doing is not working. What have they tried? What parts of it worked? What didn't? Not just that it didn't work. What part didn't work? Why it didn't work? They're very analytical about it. I was meeting with somebody today, and they said their goal is to run 30 experiments in the next year or whatever. Right? That is the right approach. Once you've run out of new things to try, so if you do this approach, every time you fail, you say, okay, this part didn't work, or people didn't behave this way. Should I try something else? If you have reasonable other options to try, it's worth building on the knowledge you've already gained about what you're doing, and keep trying. If you run out of options, then there's no point saying, if you have no new ideas on how to make a business that's not working work, then you give up on it. But it has to be a very analytical, almost engineering-like thought process. I sometimes say it's about critical thinking about your own business.
And was this what the failure conference was about? Was analyzing these patterns? And was there a pattern to failure? I mean, nobody can predict success or failure,
Yeah.
but is there a method to the madness?
I didn't attend most of the conference. I just went there to speak, so
Okay, sure.
I'm usually too busy to sit at the conference. I used to have that luxury. I don't anymore. But that conference was more about stories. Right? Because being an entrepreneur is hard. I mean, don't let anybody fool you. Entrepreneurship is really hard. And I have a couple of talks on it on my website for those who are interested. I gave one at MIT about 6 months ago, so it should be on our website. I gave another one at a CEO conference we had for Khosla Ventures companies in May that was much more of a tactical approach to entrepreneurship. Like, what do you have to do day to day? You know, at the high level, you can talk about high-level things, and that was the MIT talk and the CEO conference talk. It's called the Khosla Ventures CEO Summit talk. It was about tactical day-to-day stuff and how do you hire, who do you hire, how do you recruit, how do you present to sell your ideas to people. I lost my train of thought. What was the original question you asked?
No, it was about pattern of failure. But actually, this leads to one of the topics I wanted to discuss with you is in terms of perseverance. So one of the stories we've heard, which I think the audience would love to hear, is about how you got into Stanford GSV.
Let me, in the interest of time, not go into the story, or maybe I'll tell a short form of the story. But let me talk about perseverance and how important it is. The reason small companies do really interesting and innovative things and big companies don't is in a big company, if you're doing something innovative, and I suspect some of you work at big companies, and something doesn't work, what do? You find another project or another job within the company, or you distance yourself from this project and spend your time over here. You start looking for excuses. In a small company, failure that's not an option, right? You know, either you solve the problem or you go bankrupt. Right? There's only two states, alive or dead. Right? And when you have that choice, you get very creative about finding solutions. I always remind people, if you've seen the movie Apollo 13, you know, these astronauts got stranded in space. It was based on a true story. What they did at NASA is put all the components that were up in space already, put them in a room, and said to the team, either you use these two tools to scrub whatever it was, carbon dioxide from the atmosphere in the spacecraft, or those astronauts die. No other choice. You can't design any solution that uses anything other than what's in this table. Right? That's very, very clarifying. Suddenly you don't say, I wish I had that, or I wish I had that. None of what somebody should have done, none of that matters. It's, given these tools, what can you do? As an entrepreneur, there's lots of things you don't have. You have lots of disadvantages. But the point is, you got a set of resources. And mostly it's your entrepreneurial spirit. Right? And a few things you think you can do better than everybody else. And you have to turn that into a successful business. Right? It's very, very clarifying. In big companies, you can complain about how you need more resources, or how you need this or that, or somebody's behaving poorly. It doesn't matter. The reality is, in a startup, that is life, and that's how you build from. And in that environment, persistence becomes very important, but creativity becomes very important. So that is the approach that really works for an entrepreneur. And I find willpower and persistence and creativity can make up for so much more. Money can never make up for those things. You could have 10 times the money, not have those, and you won't be successful. If you have those things, then very little money, you can still make things happen.
Very interesting. So I would like to throw it open for the audience. I have lot of questions here. I've been waiting for 20 years to ask Vinod these questions, but I'll keep interjecting. Somebody from the audience want?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Why don't you just stand up and shout the question, and we'll.
First time you funded somebody and he or she has failed, and you wrapped up very clinically after that, and the next time the same person comes with another super idea and asks you for money, how would you treat that? Would there be any harder judgments out there?
So the question is, if an entrepreneur failed, would you fund them a second time? Absolutely, we do that all the time. And the reason is very simple. We don't really judge. We know every investment we make has a reasonable probability of failure. The key question becomes how they failed. Were they good at doing what they did? There was risks. If you're doing a startup, there's 10 things that'll make you successful or make you fail. You may control 3 or 4 of those, like how good a product do you develop, or how clever you are about a sales channel or distribution. Of those 10, you may control 4 factors, but then your competitors may control 3 factors, okay? And then 3 things may be just luck. You happen to run into the right person, or the right journalist wrote about a story about your thing and suddenly something took off. So you have to realize you don't control most of the things that make a startup successful, but you store enough to change the odds or probability of success. And building a startup is about increasing the probability of success, and then hope the right things happen. If something fails, you look at how the entrepreneur behaved, how well they understood the problems, how good the team they recruited, how adaptive they were, how quick they were to zig and zag and pivot. You look at all those factors, and if those are right, you say, they didn't work this time, I'll fund them again. If they were obstinate, weren't very analytical, didn't hire very good people, you say, okay, then they have a lower probability of success the next time, and you're not going to fund them.
Just on the increasing the odds of success, which I think is you've nailed, that is sort of the formula, right? You don't control every externality, but you can do certain things to increase the odds of success. So so team building is something you mentioned. Are there other sort of advice to the entrepreneurs you would give to tilt the odds?
Well, team is, in fact, one of the most important things you can do. And I think there was a question this morning about how do you find people. I actually recommend this process I call gene pool engineering. It's a paper on our website. It basically says, find all the ways in which your startup can fail. Find all the risks. Boy, there's a lot of noise around. Find all the risks in your startup, all the ways in which you can fail. And then say, who has the expertise to help you reduce the probability of failing in that particular way? So that's roughly the third thought process. So you minimize your risk by hiring the people who are best equipped to address the risks you have. It says, please switch off your mobile. Mine is switched off. Maybe I have another one.
As Vinod is doing this one quick thing, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
I'm not able to refresh my Twitter screen here, so if you have tweeted, please feel free to ask directly. But
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt you.
It seems like down here you don't get the Twitter stream. Yes, there's a question there, and then we'll come here.
Hi Vinod, my name is Amol. Now, obviously, you are dealing with many entrepreneurs in your venture, and you talked about the perseverance of the entrepreneur as well. I wanted to know what keeps you driving in your daily life at this age of your life.
Okay. I didn't hear the last part. The one where everybody laughed. Tell me again.
Well, I'll not say that. My question is, what keeps you driving in your daily life?
Yeah, but tell me the last part.
At this age of your life.
At this young age, at this youth in your life.
Let me address both those because both of those are important, right? So, my dad retired from the Indian Army when he was 51. That's what you did back in the late 60s or early 70s. If you look at it, I'm 56, and I easily feel I have 30 years more of work left, okay? My partner, Pierre Lamond, he turned 81 last September, and he's still working actively. At the age of 78, he signed a 10-year contract with us. Well, you can laugh about it, but it is funny. But in fact, there is no technical question you can ask that he won't understand or maybe even have an answer to, no matter how deep it is technically. The point is, you don't grow old at a certain age. You don't retire when you reach a certain age. You grow old when you retire. It's not you retire when you grow old. I fully believe that. And as long as I'm happy, healthy, I suspect I'll be working 30 years from now. Why? Because I enjoy what I do. I love what I do. When I have to, my wife says, let's go for a movie, I say, no, I could read 3 more business plans. It'd be more fun. I love my work. I love every minute. And I love working with entrepreneurs because it's really, really invigorating to work with entrepreneurs to help them. What do I like? So why do I do it? Because I like 2 things. I like doing hard things. My son's 18, and I always push them. I said, do two things I have to tell you. One, do hard things, and try hard things and try new things. That's the basic mantra I use with my kids. To me, trying to do new things is a challenge. Now, I sort of say, would I rather have interesting challenges, even though that may mean we fail often? Or do I go sit on a beach and enjoy it? I'd get bored and die after a week on a beach. You can do it for a week, but I couldn't see doing it for very long. I like having impact. I like making a difference. And I think it's a lot of fun to try new things. So some people like to watch a movie. I like to try new things and sort of try things that are risky. Maybe I'm just an adrenaline junkie. But it keeps life much more fun and interesting. I think at the other extreme, I look at very successful movie stars or musicians, and they get into drugs. I think they do that because they're bored. People who drink or drugs or things, in my view, do that because they have no other interesting way to occupy their mind. I have plenty of interesting ways to occupy my mind. And I can read a great book. I only read nonfiction. I never read fiction because why waste my time on it? Or I can look at, I can go into, just recently this summer I said I'd forgotten my chemistry and how valence electrons behave, right? So I went back and went through the whole college chemistry book again. Just read it end to end. just to refresh chemistry and how chemical reactions happen and how valence electrons behave. So it just depends what's interesting to you. Once I forget something and I can't understand something somebody is explaining in material science, I'll go back and do the basic science again. I still do that all the time. And I pride myself that in most areas of science, I can understand what people are talking about at a reasonable level of detail. And it doesn't matter whether it's nanotechnology or genetic engineering or software architectures.
Wow. That's amazing. Somebody.
Yes. So just to repeat the question, what role does books and things that you read play for an entrepreneur in making their decisions? And then the question is, what percentage of your time do you spend doing that? That's a very hard question. I read a lot. My idea of a vacation is I take a week off, I do go to a beach, and I'll generally get through 5 or 6 or 7 books, right? And they're almost always nonfiction. They tend to be around one topic, so I can read 5 things on one topic and understand it better. It depends. By and large, entrepreneurs shouldn't be reading books. They should be working on their startup. It's not a good use. But if you're a web startup, understanding behavior is really important. In that case, I'll recommend a set of books to read. So there's a book called Fascinate. If you're going to do marketing, this book postulates that there's only 7 human triggers, 7 emotions you can appeal to. If you're not appealing to one of them, you're not going to get people to click on your website or click on that link to buy something or do something on your website. That then becomes pretty important to understand. So at that level of specificity, that's a book. For those of you interested, if you email me, there's a dozen books for web startups I recommend, all related to behavioral economics, how people behave. There's a book called Made to Switch, Made to Stick, written by a Stanford professor, Chip Heath, which is how do you make an idea stick, which is what most web startups are trying to do. Mostly entrepreneurs should not be reading books. They have other things to do that are more important.
Absolutely. Yep.
My name is Harish. I have a question with context to the life that you did during entrepreneurship.
Anish, do you want to stand up?
So the question is, you might have faced a lot of failures in your life. Have you been ever depressed with like a biggest failure in your life, and how have you dealt with all those failures?
I'm generally an optimistic sort of person. I don't worry about the downside very much. Clearly, when you fail, it's not fun. It's pretty depressing. And it's particularly depressing if you go back, analyze it, and say, oh, geez, I did these things. I should have been doing that. And it's obvious to you what you should have done different. Those are pretty depressing. There's not much you can do except learn as much as you can and sort of promise not to do it again, not to make the same mistakes again. I like to say it's depressing when you repeat the same mistake. It's okay to make the mistake once and then never repeat it when you're doing other startups. You'll never stop making mistakes, but hopefully you just make new ones, not repeat ones you've already made. And so analysis of what you've done is pretty important. I sometimes just say, oh, we invested $15, $20 million in this and it cratered. What did I learn? And sometimes I'll say, so I can make that education worth $15 or $20 million to me by applying it somewhere else. That gives me some hope. But the fact is, personality, I'm an optimist.
So, Vinod, is there a cultural element to failure? I mean, in the US, there is some amount of glorification of failure. I mean, you wear it as a badge of pride, especially if you have succeeded afterwards. But in India, there's a lot more stigma with failure. You see that changing, because it's a little bit of an upstream, and the social pressure is there.
It is, and what I encourage everybody to do is not be externally driven. I think the question that was asked was, what keeps me going? One of the things I found is what always keeps me going is what I think I want to do, as opposed to what others think I should be doing. So when I got out of business school, I didn't worry about the status of earning the highest salary in the class. Plenty of people worried about that, or working for a prestigious institution. I didn't care one bit whether I worked for Goldman Sachs or a startup. In fact, I hated the idea of working for Goldman Sachs. So I encourage people to be internally driven, to be pretty analytical about what's driving you, and that's why I had that slide this morning about know your goals. Whether it's to make more money, perfectly fine. To be more famous, perfectly fine. To just be your own boss, whatever it is. Know your goals, be internally driven. Too many people, too much of the time, think about what their neighbor thinks of them, or their colleague thinks of them, or their father thinks of them. And it gets in the way of doing what we really enjoy.
Absolutely.
Why don't we go in the back there?
Hi, thanks. This is Satyajit. Just wanted to understand from an entrepreneur point of view,
You'll
and
have
also
to speak up a bit.
from an entrepreneur point of view, and also from a VC point of view. When is the right time an entrepreneur should seek guidance or support from VC from his venture, like from ideation to from when he has a prototype or a beta product available? What is the right time?
Okay, so the question is, when should you seek help from a VC? So I personally, some of you may know this, have never called myself a venture capitalist and never will. I'm not in the business of venture capital. I happen to invest money in people, but if you look at our website, it's all focused on something we call venture assistance. It's about helping entrepreneurs think about their business. I think it's very important from the very beginning. The funny thing is, if you're taking an investment, you try to decide, should you give up 20% of the company, or 30, or 40, or whatever the 50%, whatever the percentage is. That's what investors do. They give you money and they say, should I take 30% of this business, or 20%, or 50%? I look at a different question. I look at, how do I make this company 500% larger? It's hard to imagine, but in most cases, most startups I run into, it's easy to imagine how you make it 500% larger. So imagine I could tell you I can make your business 500% larger and said, give me half your company for nothing. Would you? Absolutely, because you'd be left with 250% instead of 100%. It's hard to imagine people can do that. And it's not a definite, because sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But probabilistically, there is clearly an opportunity in most startups to build a company with the same strategy that's much larger. So I'd encourage all of you who are entrepreneurs to watch a video. I did a Silicon Valley meetup about 2 or 3 weeks ago called 106 miles. It's the letter numbers 106 and then miles. And you can search for it. I'm sure and my name, and you'll find a video they posted. And what I did is, it was a fireside chat like this, but it was different. And they picked 6 entrepreneurs to come up, and in front of the whole audience, there was about 500 people. They presented their business plans to me, and my job was to make them think about their business in a much bigger way than they were thinking. I had no idea when we started how I would do that. It was sort of going blind. I didn't know really, I hadn't looked at the startup business plans they had presented me. So I'd on the spot make up, how do I think about making these businesses bigger? And the event was called, you can search it on Twitter to #GetBigger. So the whole goal was, can I make entrepreneurs think about their own business, the one they're working on for years, and bring something new where their business could be much, much larger than it was? And you can see this video and decide for yourself whether it was useful or not. But to your question, that kind of help, and you could judge for yourself by watching the video, is absolutely critical for every entrepreneur. Most companies I meet, I can think of how you might try some things that might make it bigger. Now, important to realize, I'm not saying it will make it bigger. I'm saying it might make it bigger, because you can never have a guarantee. It's probabilistic. But I find doubling the value of a business over the course of 3 or 4 years as an investor and partner is the minimum I should be trying to do. It's an important way in which I measure my success. What did I contribute to this business? And that's why I call myself a venture assistant, and I never call myself a venture capitalist. I think the biggest thing I bring to a business is how to make them think bigger about their own business, better, to staff it better, to recruit better people, and that is absolutely critical. When you think you need money, usually you need money, but you need much, much more, and you can find that in a partner if you get the right VC. The bad news is, I think 95% of VCs hurt your business more than they help your business. And I'm being pretty arrogant in saying that, but it's at least a belief system I have, and I'm not shy about saying it and upsetting some people. Let's go in the back there. I do feel young. I definitely feel more fresh than when I was 30. I try more new things, and I always try and force myself to think about what am I doing that's outside my comfort zone. So I'll tell you a funny story. I always say, you know, all of us get comfortable, we do certain things well, and then once we are good at something, we keep trying to do that and not new things. Remember I said to my kids, try new things, try hard things. And so I always ask myself, how do I push myself outside my comfort zone? Try something crazy, something that people would clearly say, obviously that guy, once we fail in this new thing, they'll say, oh, that guy is so arrogant, he thinks he can do anything. See what they tried and how they failed. But the thing I haven't been able to push myself to do, so the hardest thing I could ever imagine is me going around life wearing an earring. And so I've been trying to tell my wife, one of these days I'm going to get an earring, because it's the last thing I could imagine myself doing. And pushing each person, pushing themselves in ways outside their comfort zone, outside of things that they wouldn't normally do, that are difficult to imagine doing, I think is a really important part of staying alive, mentally alive, as you get older or younger. Right? But to give you a very, very specific example, we just invested in something we call Meat 2.0. Now, high-tech silicon chips, software, internet, mobile, but making new meat, new hamburger or new lamb, that sounds crazy, but we are actually attempting it. We are making eggs without having them come from a chicken. We are making meat without having them come from lamb or cattle or chicken. We are making milk without it coming from mammals. Now, we might fail, but I'm pretty excited about it. And frankly, people will snicker when we fail, if we fail. I hope we don't fail. But if we succeed, people will remember it for 20 years. Yeah? And if we succeed, meat alone in the US is beef alone is a $100 billion market in the US. And if we have meat that's half the price and 5 times more energy efficient and takes 1/5 the land, boy, it's world changing. So I said, 90% chance this will fail. But boy, 10% chance that we can change the world of agriculture suddenly got me all excited. I'm so excited about it.
I think many of us are vegetarians, and we're definitely rooting for you on this project.
Yeah, so this will be vegetarian meat and vegetarian eggs.
So speaking of trying unusual stuff, we are told that you've done crazy things like hang gliding, and we just heard in the morning you went to the Paratha alley in Chandni Chowk for a paratha. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the unusual stuff you've done in your personal life?
Well, it's sort of this idea of always looking for new experiences. I just think life is much more fun when you do it. And the more you fall into a routine, and the more you sort of do the comfortable thing, and the more you do things that others think you should doing, if you're a vice president at Google, that you should stay a vice president and not sort of jump into a 5-person startup, I think the happier people are. That's my personal belief. Otherwise, they get bored and they do crazy things. It's my belief. I don't know what to do with it. There's a question back here. Yes, the gentleman in the yellow shirt. It's on, so just speak. Okay. So the question is, in an area like education, where the government says social services should be free, can you build a startup? Absolutely. Just because there's a free level of service doesn't mean people don't want something better. We all get free public schools, central schools, or government schools you can go to. But do people hire tutors for their kids in the evening? Yes. That's a profitable business. Do people want to do even more? Absolutely. But it doesn't have to be high school education. Me and my wife are committed to making education through K through 12 free and not for profit. I hope I can do that. We are trying to do that, and anybody who wants to help there, we need plenty of help. But there's nothing to say you can't teach a person computer programming. That's education. You can't teach them to be an auto mechanic or an electrician or a nurse, or, there's plenty of vocational education. In fact, the best places to start with education is where you can say to the person, come join whatever I am teaching you. A year from now, you'll be making twice as much money. That's what vocational education does. Teaches you a skill that lets you get a better job. When we started the Indian School of Business in Hyderabad, which was only a few years ago, proposition was very simple. Come pay us 10, 15 lakhs. It was exorbitant fees in those days for a business school. But you come in with a salary, you go out with 3 times that salary a year later. It was an economic proposition. So education, you can make money.
Somebody come over there in the back. Yeah, you.
Hello, my name is Yuichi Higuchi. I'm from Japan. I'm 24 now. My future aim is to be an investor. I have one question. When you were young, what were you thinking about your future?
I'd say when I was young, I fell in love with science and technology. So I decided very, very early that science and technology was going to be my only religion. Literally, it's my only religion. I take it very seriously because I think it's the single most powerful tool we have to improve the livelihood of people, to improve what everybody on this planet has, and solve most of the planet's problems. It doesn't matter whether it's education, whether it's healthcare, whether it's transportation, whether it's replacing oil or electricity, or better lighting, or better houses, or better internet and mobile applications. It's a powerful tool. So I fell in love with the idea of inventing new things that didn't exist before. But frankly, when I was 16, I heard the story of immigrants like Andy Grove leaving Hungary to go to Silicon Valley and start their own company. I said, oh, I want to start my own technology company. And since the age of 16, I wanted to do that. And I was very lucky. I was able to get to Silicon Valley from Delhi cantonment. And then start my own company. One of the things I did, I had this bad habit of whenever I felt like doing something, I just do it. I think somebody brought up this issue, maybe, in fact, MR said this morning, I don't know how Vinod did computer programming at IIT in the early 70s. The fact is, when I joined IIT at the age of 16, there was no computer programming class anywhere in any IIT or any university that I knew about. None existed in India. So 4 of us at the age of 16 got together and started the first computer programming club, which I think was the first computer programming class anywhere in India. But it didn't seem like a big idea. It was like we wanted to do this. And so we just did it. We started a club for computer programming. It may be the first computer programming thing. And then we got very, very lucky. And why we got lucky was about 6 months after we started this and started teaching ourselves computer programming, IIT Delhi employees went on strike. And there was nobody to run the computer center. So the administration let the 4 of us, because we knew more about computers and programming after 6 months of doing this at age 16, than anybody around. So they gave us the whole computer center. With the employees on strike, we could do whatever we wanted. We had this whole computer center. Now, the main computer center had 32 kilobytes of memory and no disk drives. And everything was card entry. But, you know, it gave us a big start. Right after that, I got interested in biomedical engineering. I was always fascinated by new ideas. And I said, boy, you can engineer the human body. And they were just talking about things like pacemakers and things like that, right? Or prosthetic limbs. And so we approached a professor who agreed to start a class in biomedical engineering at IIT Delhi in 1974 or 75. Most people hadn't heard the term. And so we did that, and we approached All India Institute of Medical Sciences, and we started doing some joint classes between IIT Delhi. And so it's like, you can always say what doesn't exist or create it yourself. This is why I said you can sort of see what experts think and what exists, what is conventional wisdom, or invent the future you want. You want a programming class? Create one. You want a biomedical engineering program? Create one. Now, what part of my genetics makes me do these, I don't know. And so then I did my master's in biomedical engineering, but I didn't forget that I wanted to start a company. So I had to find a way to get to Silicon Valley, and an MBA was a good way to get to Silicon Valley. I used it as an excuse to get into Silicon Valley because, frankly, I didn't have any cousin or uncle or anybody I knew who could introduce me to anybody in anything in the US. I had no relatives or contacts or relationships. Hard to imagine today everybody has that, but none existed. So it's about really creating the future. To your specific question, if you're an entrepreneur, in 2 years of doing a startup, you'll learn more than 2 years of an MBA. So right? If you don't have a great idea, you don't have passion for, go spend a year at the Indian School of Business or something like that, you'll learn a lot. It is useful. But as an entrepreneur, it's always better to just jump in and learn.
One last question is, I read that...
All right, why don't we, just in the interest of time, go there.
Hi, my name is Bala. My question is, there have been a lot of cases of what we call the founders of the company taking money from the VC fund for themselves. So what's your take on that?
I don't like that. I don't generally support it. Sometimes there's exceptional circumstances where you might do a little bit, but when I invest in a founder, I want them to invest in their own startup too and have a big stake and bet along with me.
We take something from the back. The black shirt lady.
I see my product as a
Religion.
Okay.
When, as an entrepreneur, you pretty much fall in love with your product or the idea, and that's to an extent necessary to get you going ahead of the tough times. But there are times when you get too much into it and the persistence stays there and you don't see the obvious. How do you suggest that, how do you disassociate yourself from the product when you actually think that this is the time to shut down?
Again, startup life is about balance. Remember, I said you have to be an optimist, you have to believe in yourself, have passion, have religion in your own startup. But I also said you have to be paranoid. I think I talked about that this morning. And so it's very much like this example I gave about gene pool engineering. I always ask people, how can we fail? What could go wrong? What could be a problem? And so you're always soliciting input, not always taking it, but at least soliciting it so you can consider it carefully and think critically about it. Being successful at a startup is taking everything and analyzing what is working, what's not. Even if it's working well, you can ask, how can you do better? And the more you do that, the more you understand your own business, including the criticism others are saying. So one thing, for example, I tell people, if you're an entrepreneur and you don't need funding because you're doing well, go present it to 6 VCs, not because you need funding, but because you want to know why they think it might not work. Getting that feedback is hard, but in fact, it's the most important thing a VC can do for you. Sometimes people say, I'm really tough with people. I'm trying to be helpful and say, here's how you should think about the things that might fail, how you could improve your business, things that could come back and bite you. So those are things that are very, very important for an entrepreneur to do. But that doesn't mean you have to give up on the vision. The vision is your strategy. Think of these other things as your tactics. And your tactics can always get better, so you want as much criticism of your tactics as possible, and separate your tactics, for which you need lots of input from your vision.
Question here in the front.
Why do you think there's a problem why 29-year-olds don't have 56-year-old partners in their business?
Why 29?
29-year-old entrepreneurs, why don't they have 56-year-old experienced partners?
So the question is, why don't 29-year-old founders have 56-year-old partners? It brings up something else I think I want to talk about, even though that's not the question you asked, but it'll answer your question. When we as people, let's say I'm starting a company, most founders will say, I have to start a company, who do I hire? And you value people who are more like you. An engineer will hire another engineer, a 29-year-old will be more comfortable with another 29-year-old. In fact, what they should be asking is, what is it that I don't have? And who brings that expertise? If I'm full of creative ideas, and I'm trying lots of new things as a 29-year-old, I may, if I'm scaling, need a 56-year-old partner who knows management and knows process and knows those things. And so it's important that entrepreneurs think outside their own box and their own image and hire people who create a different point of view. I sort of like to say, and I have a presentation about entrepreneurship on our website. I think there's a video with it, but I don't know, called The Entrepreneurial Roller Coaster. By the way, the subtitle is Where the Highs Are High and the Lows Are Low. Times when you're really confident and really feeling great, and then something wrong happens, it's really depressing and everything's going wrong. Entrepreneurship is like a roller coaster. It's not easy. There's lots of depressing times. You just have to pull through them. But in it, I have a slide called Managed Conflict. That means a successful startup, not everybody's thinking the same way. They're thinking differently. There's conflicting biases. There's conflicting ideas. There's conflicting points of view. That's what this paper, Gene Pool Engineering, is about.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Just to finish the thought, what you have to do is engineer this managed conflict, this opposing points of view. Manage because you don't want it to become destructive. You want it to be constructive dialogue about different points of view. And entrepreneurs should do that.
Go ahead.
Or by?
Legislation.
Or through legislation. Now, in case if we think about technology, what roadmap you suggest for India?
Okay. I'm not an expert in this. Legislation never solves a problem, but legislation and policy can facilitate a direction. So the right legislation can increase transparency and can reduce corruption. But what will reduce corruption is transparency. Technology can play a big role in transparency if all forms are submitted online. So, for example, one of the reasons I'm excited about DAI is it will increase transparency. If every form you ever need is available online, and when you submit it online, and it's tracked, and the reason something is delayed, rejected, is online, and it's transparent, it will reduce corruption. If it starts hurting somebody's career because they're taking longer on certain applications, it will reduce corruption.
Last question on the back.
Vinod, My name is Sandeep, and I'm a co-founder of a small startup company set up at Bangalore. Given an opportunity for a very early stage company to go to the Valley, do you suggest them to go to the Valley and set up their company and operate their business over there, or stay back in India? Could you please comment on that, based on the current climate?
So it depends on what you're doing. If your markets are Indian markets, then no, you want to be close to your markets. If your markets are global markets, often it helps to be in that culture. Now, I don't know Bangalore enough because I don't spend enough time here, but it feels like that culture is also developing here. So maybe you don't need to anymore. I don't know the answer to that. Thank you all very much. We are out of time.
Thank you very much, Vinod.
Well, thank you so much. I now request Sharat Sharma to hand over mementos to Mr. Vinod Khosla and Mr. Bala Parthasarathy as a token of appreciation.